all, and welcome to Meanwhile in the West, my weekly series where I look at what's making headlines here in Western Australia by reading through letters to the editor in my local newspaper, The West Australian. First up this week, labelling is nuts, 31st of December 2014. Christmas is, among many things, a time for food. I headed off to my local supermarket, IGA, to buy some nuts. Always wanting to buy Australian, I waded through the fine print on the various nut varieties. However, Australian nuts were nowhere to be found. Fine print, like made from local and imported, tells the consumer nothing, and a new label of telling the consumer nothing has been added. Made from Australian peanuts except when not available. Why is this ridiculous food labelling allowed to continue? Will McGee? Gooseberry Hill. Okay, so the food labelling system here in Australia is pretty good. One aspect where it falls down somewhat is in countries of origin labelling for processed foods. So what you were looking at was processed nuts. Had you been looking at raw nuts sold as a fresh produce, then it has to be labelled with its country of origin. And it would have to say something simple like Australia or the US or wherever it comes from. What you must have been looking at is packaged nuts. Now, packaged nuts, because they are packaged, count as processed food. And the labelling laws here, basically, for processed food, simply say that it has to be labelled where it was processed and whether it was processed from local or imported ingredients. It doesn't have to label where the ultimate origin of all the ingredients were. And the reason for this, basically, is because it would be insane to have to label the origin of every single ingredient in every packaged food. That is something that is completely unviable. What we have seen, though, is we've seen things which formerly have not been processed foods, like nuts. So 20 years ago, people bought nuts in bulk, or, you know, you got your little scoop at the supermarket and you scooped up your nuts and put it in your bag and you bought it. And that was a fresh food item, if you like. Nowadays, we tend to buy pre-packaged nuts. And we've seen that happen with a lot of things. So things have moved from being fresh into some level of packaging and processing. And because of that, they've shifted from having clear country of origin labelling into having basically unclear origin, because they've had to have clear country of manufacture. So most of these things were manufactured in Australia. So they're manufactured in Australia from local and imported ingredients, which is all that the labelling requires. If you wanted more than that, you would have to either buy, as I say, fresh nuts, or you would have to come up with some other system of labelling that didn't go overboard. Lots of processed food have almost hundreds of ingredients, and so require labelling of country of origin for all of them would be insane. Although I have some sympathy with the idea of maybe having the top 4 ingredients, say, having to have country of origin labelling or something like that. Anyway, that's why the country of labelling laws here are not as strict as perhaps they might be. But I suspect that they're as good as anywhere else in the world. Next up, cross about Buns, 31st of December 2014. Sorry, Woolworths, you have just lost a customer who has spent thousands of dollars per year in your supermarkets. The idiocy of the sheer sacrilege of those of your marketers who felt it appropriate to launch within 3 days of the commemoration of the birth of Jesus hot cross buns relative to his death simply knows no bounds. If you feel that the almighty dollar transcends any decency towards a Christian religion, may your ASX share value continue to decline. Gary Wainscott, Cardinia. Ah, yes, the sacrilege. So, there's constantly this complaint here about Christmas seeming to start earlier each year because we don't really celebrate Halloween, and we certainly don't celebrate Thanksgiving at all. There's nothing really in the calendar that stops Christmas decorations and Christmassy things from appearing in the shops earlier and earlier in the year. I think this year, at least September, there were Christmassy things in the shops. The same's true for Easter. As soon as Christmas is over, there's nothing really. There's a little bit for Australia Day, but basically the next big celebration is going to be Easter. And so there's nothing really on the calendar that stops things like hot cross buns from appearing in the shops. And the basic reason why they're there is because they sell. People, for some strange reason, like hot cross buns. And so, yeah, they've got them in the shop. I mean, I agree that it's a little bit early in the year. Before, this was 31st of December, which means that they were seen in the shops on according to, about this 28th of December. So the fact that we hadn't even had New Year's by that point, and they were already putting hot cross buns, seems a little bit much. But that said, hot cross buns aren't, as with everything, they're becoming less and less about Easter and more just a thing in themselves. And the idea that you were outraged not because they were pushing Easter so early, but rather that it's sacrilegious and against the Christian religion, frankly, I find that laughable and entertaining. Ulterior motive, 3rd of January 2015. I've long suspected that those opposing the use of drumlines are opposition plants trying to turn opinion against the government, because drumlines have been used effectively in New South Wales and Queensland for many years without similar protests. I will accept that these people are genuine when they set up, from their own pockets, a system of financial support for the families of those taken by sharks, given that they have prevented the government from protecting those who enter the water. John Randall, Hall's Head. Okay, so first up, those people protesting against drumlines have set up a system to compensate families of, or to support financially, the families of people killed by sharks. And they've done that through being taxpayers. We have a safety net, a welfare safety net of to support everybody, including families of people killed by sharks. And most of the people who are protesting against it are taxpayers. In fact, almost all of them would be taxpayers, whether they end up paying an amount of tax or not. And so such a system is in place. And to suggest that people should set up some private system to show that they are genuinely, I don't know, against drumlines for a genuine purpose, is just crazy. The other thing is, though, I have done a little bit of research into drumlines recently, because I hadn't, gotten across the issue. As far as I can tell, the evidence is not absolutely rock solid, but the best evidence we have is that drumlines do work in reducing shark deaths. Almost all of the experience with drumlines across the world and over time has been with drumlines and shark nets. We don't use shark nets here in WA. And so it's hard to tell whether the drumlines by themselves are particularly effective, but they seem to be, and the evidence seems to suggest they are. And so on that basis, more power to the drumlines. The only problem is that, so I don't agree with those protesters who say that drumlines simply don't work. The evidence seems to suggest they do. I am with those protesters who say that we don't know the impact it would have on what is an endangered species. The species that they're trying to kill, particularly the great white shark, is an endangered species. And it seemed reasonable to think that this might have some effect on it. Now, the EPA refused to consider that in their consideration of drumlines here, but only on the basis that drumlines were only proposed for 1 year and were only used for 1 year. And the EPA's reasoning was that the amount of sharks killed in that 1 year probably wasn't going to have a dramatic effect one way or the other on shark populations, which probably sounds reasonable. So we're not sure. So I would support protesters who say that we probably should be a little bit more careful about, killing off sharks, endangered species. I think the biggest argument against drumlines here is that it costs $20 million to install them. The installation, for 1 year, that was $20 million was spent last summer on it. That $20 million covered 200 kilometres of coastline out of a total West Australian coastline of 200,000 kilometres, so 0.1%. Now, these were carefully targeted to the beaches that were most frequented, so that's reasonable. So it's not as bad as it sounds in terms of 0.1% of the coastline. But when you look at where the actual shark attacks have taken, because the number of shark attacks here is, and across the world, is so low that you can actually just look at every single one. You don't have to rely on statistics. You can actually just count back through them. Because we're only having 1 or 2 a year, basically. We had a run of 7 in 3 years, so just over 2 a year, which was definitely outside, within trend, given our population growth, but a little bit higher than perhaps we were used to. Before that, we're looking very much steady 1 to 2 a year, some years none, some years 3. And so you can look at them, and at least half of the attacks, and certainly a lot of the recent ones that prompted the drum lines, didn't take place in beaches that were particularly close to where the drum lines would have been. So a lot of them are remote beaches, especially the fatal shark attacks, because what differentiates, as far as I can tell, between fatal attacks and non-fatal attacks, in a large extent, is how quickly you can get treatment. And so the more remote a person is attacked by a shark, the much more likely it is to be fatal. So in terms of preventing fatal shark attacks here in Western Australia, drumlines is an incredibly costly policy. Now, 20 million doesn't sound like all that much in a sort of state budget, and it isn't. But the fact that it was saving perhaps 2 lives a year means that that's $10 million per life saved. And that is a very low rate of return on investment. You could take that money and invest it in, say, health programs for remote Aboriginal people, and $20 million will save you a lot more than 2 lives per year. You could do it in youth suicide prevention. You could do it in diverting people away from the justice system. I mean, these are just areas I'm familiar with. I'm sure there are plenty of other health programs you could invest it in, or social programs that would save you a lot more than 2 lives a year, purely on the basis for $20 million. And so on that basis, and that's if it absolutely stopped all shark attacks full stop. My suspicion, given on historical data and where the shark attacks have taken place, is if you're lucky, you would get about half of them. So you're really only saving 1 a year for that $20 million. Now, that was the first year and only year it's run. And so you could perhaps expect it to be cheaper if we ran it every year. Perhaps, because you could offer longer-term contracts and things like that. But you're still talking a lot of money invested for very small numbers of lives saved. Now, that's not to say that I'm against saving lives, but every time you spend money on one thing, you are not spending it on something else. There is an opportunity cost, and you are literally saying we would rather save the 1 life of somebody or 2 lives of people taken by sharks than the 10 lives of poor Aboriginal people. And you are literally saying that. And so I think on that basis, it's a stupid waste of money to be put into that. And really, the only justification for it is for political gain. It was seen, especially when it was first introduced, and I think to an extent it riled up the base, it was seen as being a politically good move. It made the Premier look like he was big and tough, that he was killing sharks. I think there was a bit more backlash than was expected, which is why it hasn't been done again. But I think that was the only real argument for it. I don't think there is any particularly rational argument for it. Petrol problem, 3rd of January 2015. Could someone from Fuel Watch please explain why Friday's average petrol price in the north and south of Perth is $1.09, while the residents in the eastern suburbs have to pay an average of $1.19 for the same commodity? What does the extra 10 cents represent? Deirdre McGorry, Greenmount. Well, put simply, the prices of petrol retailed here are determined mainly by supply and demand, and mainly it's about demand and what the retailers think they can get away with. The north, south and east of Perth, because we're such a large metropolitan area, are essentially separate markets for fuel. Very few people are willing. The reason why we divide it up like that is because very few people are willing to leave their chunk of Perth to travel to another chunk to get petrol, say, because it simply is too far. And so these are essentially separate markets, and the fuel companies will charge whatever they think they can get away with. And on that particular day, they figured they could get away with more in the east than otherwise. It could be that there's a different cycle of prices in the east of Perth, and the cycles are out of sync, perhaps. Or it could just be that, for whatever reason, there's less competition there, perhaps. Or people will simply pay on average more. And the other thing is that petrol is a commodity, indeed, but petrol as sold by a retailer is not a commodity, because you are not just paying for the petrol, but you're paying for the convenience and the location that you receive it. And also you're often paying for the accoutrements of the service station. So the larger service stations with a big shop and things like that, will charge a different rate than the smaller service stations. And so technically the petrol is a commodity, but the way it's retailed means that it is anything but a commodity. And that's why the prices are, go up and down, seemingly independent of a lot of what's happening on world markets. Lastly for this week, form of theft, 5th of June 2015. Why do gift vouchers have expiry dates? Voucher charity letters, January 3rd. The money has been paid and is still legal tender, whether it's 6 months or 12 months or 18 months old. The holder of the voucher should be able to exchange it for goods of the same value at any time. The retailer or seller of the voucher has, after all, had the use of this money since the voucher was bought. To say after 6 months or 12 months that this money has suddenly become valueless looks a lot like theft. We sell lots of gift vouchers in our business and make a point of telling our customers the voucher won't expire. Elizabeth Tilley, Pemberton. So, gift vouchers, in Christmas time is a sort of big thing, and every year people get a bit upset about the way that they work. And broadly speaking, gift vouchers are a scam. So they are a way for large retailers to essentially make money for doing very little. So the way it works is this, is the person hands over, say, $100 and they get the voucher. They then give the voucher to the recipient, who is then forced to spend it in that store or that chain of stores or whatever, rather than be able to spend it like cash. So already you're locked into a particular store, which is good for the stores. The big thing they do is they refuse to give any change on it, which in some ways is reasonable, in other ways it's not. So the way it's reasonable is it prevents people from just simply exchanging it for cash, going in, buying taking a $100 gift voucher and purchasing a 10-cent item and taking $99.90 in change. Essentially, the retailers want to keep you to, it's a gift voucher. You're supposed to spend it in that store, and therefore, they don't want to have to give change. But what this means is that overwhelmingly, people spend, have a $100 gift voucher, they find $90 worth of things that they want, and they either forfeit that $10 because they can't find anything to spend it on, or they end up buying $110 worth of stuff, which means that the business gets an extra $10 that it wouldn't otherwise have got. That's just the mechanics of it. I think part of what it trades on is the gift giver, two things. The gift giver not wanting to give cash. In our society here, giving cash is considered somewhat crass. It's considered that you haven't put any thought or effort into giving the gift. And for some reason, gift vouchers are seen, at least you put the thought into which gift voucher to give. I don't see it as much better than cash, but for some reason people are much more comfortable giving gift vouchers rather than cash. So there's that. The other part, which is a big part of it for, I think, a lot of people, is that it allows them some control over what you spend your gift voucher on, your present on. So if they give you cash, you could spend it, as other people in letters to the editor noted this week, you could spend it on alcohol, and they don't want you spending it on alcohol. And that is, it's a way for the gift giver to control what you do with their gift. Which I guess makes some sense in terms of if you're the gift giver, but in a way is a little bit controlling for my tastes. Now, the other part of it is expiry dates, and that's a lot of the scam in it, is that there are expiry dates on the gift card, some amount of money remains on them, and then after 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, depending on where you get it from, that money then simply disappears off the gift card and is banked by the large retail chain. And estimates vary about how much it is, but it's as high as 84% of money spent on gift cards is not redeemed for one reason or another, and is simply money in the bank for these large chains. Which is one of the reasons why I think gift cards is a scam. But there is a reasonable argument for having some kind of cutoff, and the reason is this. If you're a large business, then every gift card you sell is essentially a debt that you have. You've taken that money and you owe it to somebody in exchange for the gift card when it comes in. And so this is a liability that your business is carrying. And as a large publicly traded company, you could have substantial amounts of money, liability tied up for that. And to be a responsible business, you essentially have to be able to cover all your liabilities. So if suddenly gift cards became, well, they are quite popular at times, you could have, large chains could have millions and millions of dollars in liabilities that they essentially have to have coverage for. They have to be able to afford that at any given time. The problem is that, as we see, is that 84% of, up to 84% of the value of gift cards is never cashed in. So that's unclaimed liabilities that a large company might have to fund in perpetuity. And that's not a very viable business model. And so, quite reasonably, they say, look, after a certain amount of time, we don't want to have to hold on to, cash or whatever to cover our liabilities for all of those unclaimed gift cards out there. We want to be able to write them off as no longer being owed by us, because you haven't shown sufficient interest in actually cashing them in. Now, most people, I think, I struggle to see a year as being too short a time in which to cash in a gift card. My thinking on gift cards is they are a gift. They're given to you as a present. They're not savings for a rainy day. You are supposed to cash them in for a gift. And if you can't get around to doing it within a year, I honestly think that that's, a reasonable time frame to expect people. Now, I think it's a bit different for things like flights. I know there's been issues with Qantas, in particular with gift vouchers, not honouring them after their 12 months. If you've booked a flight and then had to cancel for good reasons and you want to book another flight, you might not be able to get it within that 12-month window. And I think certainly a much bigger window is necessary for things like booking holidays. Because for a lot of people, you might get one holiday a year. If you can't book it this year, you might need to book it, at least year round. But for most retail gift cards, a year should be plenty. If you can't cash it in within 12 months, then I don't know what's wrong with you. And as the letter writer, if you are a small business owner, it's probably not a big deal to have these gift cards out there. You're probably not selling enough gift vouchers to give you pause to think, oh, what happens if people come and cash these in? What if I can't honour them? And so really, it's quite different for smaller businesses than it is for large businesses who are answerable to shareholders. Anyway, that's it for me this week. We had a record-breaking 44.4 degrees yesterday, one of our hottest days on record. Thankfully, it's nowhere near as hot today. I hope you're all doing well. I feel better having had a little bit of a rant, and I'll see you all next week when we find out what's happening in the West. See ya.